all for coming out. Basically, young voters are sheep, easy prey for political wolves. Many of today's young people don't know anything about politics, yet they still vote. Anyone with a level head can agree today's elected officials on both sides are doing a pretty bad job in Washington. This is at least in part thanks to young, extremely uninformed voters. The young people today are clueless about the real issues mortgage-paying adults face, but are allowed to vote on issues affecting citizens both nationally and locally. Younger first-time voters are simply a second vote on behalf of their parents, oftentimes, in my opinion, and far too many rely on what they see on television or read on social media sites to form a flawed outside opinion. Although at times convincing, the well-known campaign advertisements force misconstrued information on potential voters as facts. The information given in these ads are often simply times just not true. Yet many young voters can be easily influenced to make a rash decision based solely on ad campaign that they saw on TV or saw on social media. While never looking at the bigger picture, these young impressionable minds cast their vote only to generally regret the decision later. It's common knowledge that young adults around the age of 18 typically make pretty bad life decisions. Not all, but oftentimes. The so-called adults lack the development of true cognitive reasoning. The fact is, 18-year-old children just shouldn't have the right to vote. Some would argue that if you're old enough to go to war for your country, then you should have the right to vote. This was America's logic in allowing this to happen in the first place. It used to be 21, it was lowered to 18. If you could be drafted for war, then you should have the right to vote. The voting age was never even a concern in America until we needed basically soldiers for Hitler's Nazi Germany war in 1941, World War II. Congress began to debate amending the Selective Service and Training Act to lower the draft age from 21 to 18. The 26th Amendment was a bait and switch, simply used by Congress to gather more soldiers. Young people all have one thing in common. They know everything, right? Is technology at fault here? The instant gratification generation has no time or patience. They want everything right now. So much so they're quick to believe farce propaganda passed off as viable facts and use it as such. Sure, in the digital age, there are still many credible sources to find information, but the problem is there are so many not so credible sources. However, with today's space-age gadgets and distractions, why form your own opinion when you can be downloaded and formatted for you, right? Many of today's youth have told reliable sources in many surveys that gather their information from satire news such as Comedy Central and Facebook. Modern lack of facts can be seen by how Bill Clinton was given so much credit by young voters for really Reagan's policies. Again, all personal opinions of Clinton aside, he signed NAFTA, left the economy to pretty much run on autopilot, and spent more time on Air Force One than any president in recent history. Yet young voters then and now still love him. Young people hardly remember how open trade with China killed the job market slowly but surely over time. When I've debated with young adults, they still credit Clinton for a good economy of the 1990s. Of course, many of them were not even born yet. Truth is, in my opinion, Reagan fixed the economy. After all, it takes quite a while when someone becomes president for us to see the long-term effects. The love for Clinton skyrocketed even more sadly after the Monica Lewinsky fiasco, which is just sad. Case in point, morals and common sense of old have vanished. Modern society today seems as people are de-evolving again, in my opinion. Now, there was a time when people played outside, read more books, and were raised with more common decency and values. Once people in general had a common respect for their fellow man, you could take a man at his word, and overall, morals still existed. Maybe then it was not so bad for 18-year-old, again, children to vote. When Americans were needed in World War II, many served in the Vietnam War, voting rights was an entirely different matter to Congress. They needed soldiers for war, so they lowered the lowered the voting age again to 18. Although young voters lack cognitive thinking, do not seek reliable sources, and still have lack of knowledge of politics, they show up by the masses, and they can influence an election. Whether anyone agrees with them or not, young voters majorly impact many elections. If politicians get these young adults excited for a cause, young voters can win an election major in their favor. They show up oftentimes more than any other group. It is best to let teenage reasoning decide an election, or decide what's going to happen for our future. Do they really know who they voted for, Even more importantly, will young voters continue to vote for politicians aimed to strip hardworking Americans of their constitutional rights? Only time will tell what will happen. Hate it or love it, the young voter is here to stay. Young voters are the reason many bad politicians have been elected. This has happened not once, not twice, but many times. There's a saying that a young person who isn't a liberal has no heart, and an old person who is not conservative has no brain. This statement seems accurate pertaining to the last election in particular. Young minds were manipulated by promises of hope and change. Many young adults argued the Affordable Care Act was going to save people. Sure, to take the clause, most insurance companies refused to insure someone from pre-existing conditions out of the equation seemed like a good idea. However, this is extremely deceiving. The ACA is not healthcare, and many doctors refuse to accept it as such. Obama's ruined healthcare as America once knew it. The only people the ACA has really benefited are those out of work or those who don't use insurance at all. Most people who have had good insurance plans have lost them due to the Affordable Care Act. Only time will tell the whole story. So far, the major crowning achievement of this current administration is simply failure. In closing, those not old enough to buy a handgun or even a beer should not have the right to vote. They're immature, naive, rely mostly on fiction that they pass off as facts. If the U.S. military didn't need them to fight in foreign wars, then they wouldn't have the right to vote to abuse. I highly encourage Americans to wake up and increase the voting age back to 20. Thank you.